Welcome to Interlink Cloud Advisors and CoStrategix with our co-hosted webinar, Building a Data-Driven Organization in AI World, focused specifically on how you can leverage Microsoft Fabric in your organizations to mature your data analytics capabilities. Really appreciate you being with us today. My name is Mike Wilson. I am Chief Technology Officer with Interlink Cloud Advisors and your host for today. I am joined by the brilliant Matt Wehrman with CoStrategix, the Director of Enterprise Architecture. And we've got a ton of content coming up for you like we always do. A couple quick things. If you're new to Interlink, just very quickly about us, we focus on Microsoft. That's what we do. It's the only thing we do. We understand Microsoft is complex. We understand the licensing can be difficult to understand. We understand figuring out how to buy things the right way can be difficult. And we understand that the technology is changing on what seems like an almost daily basis. And so our goal is to be able to help our customers understand how to interact with Microsoft, how to buy things the right way, how to deploy the technologies the right way, and fundamentally how to get them to reinvest back into your business and part of that. And if you're not familiar with CoStrategix, okay, I am thrilled to have them with us today because fundamentally I see them as a very similar organization to Interlink. They're Cincinnati-based just like we are, and they bring you the best of both worlds in terms of the ability to go through and leverage the Microsoft solution specifically around data, AI, and Fabric. It's not something we focus on, so we've got a very tight partnership. And again, their go-to-market approach and the way that they help customers really adopt and truly unlock the value of these technologies is second to none. So from an agenda standpoint, what are we going to hit? We're going to talk about why it's important to go through and build a data-driven organization and what that means. We're going to spend a lot of time in the bulk of the conversation today focusing on why Fabric in particular and how that can help facilitate getting to those insights faster than ever in a more secure way, how organizations adopt this over time in a measured way with the help of Interlink and CoStrategix. Obviously, data security and governance is top of mind for pretty much everybody, especially when we're talking about data and AI. A few potential next steps, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end, but happy to take your questions and answers at any time. Please go through and share those in the chat as you have them, and Matt and I will do our best to go through and get those answers to you. So building a data-driven organization. So I love this statistic from the MIT Sloan Management Review. 87% of organizations believe AI will give them a competitive edge. And the interesting thing to me about the statistic is that it's not 100%, because fundamentally, the more that we invest in our systems, the more we invest in our technology, the more that gives us competitive edge versus our competitors. I read a Harvard Business Review article a couple years ago, and it was really talking about the idea here that our digital estate, the quality of our data, the quality of our applications, the quality of our algorithms are really an enormous part of the business value of today's modern business. So the more that we invest in streamlining, the more we invest in the quality of the data, the more that we get out of it, and the more that, again, we can go through and outcompete the other people in our industry, which is fundamentally why all of us are in business. Right? But what we're seeing here is that AI itself, in particular, the adoption of large language models like ChatGPT that have led to things like Copilot and others, the AI tools that we have are only as good as the data they're trained on. If we put the AI and put it to work against data that is out of date or data that is not correct, it's going to spit out incorrect answers. So that means that organizations are reacting that by saying, hey, we see the power of these tools. We know we can unlock the value out of them, but we've really got to go through and make sure that our data house is in order, whether it's structured data inside of databases, whether it's data on SharePoint sites or file servers. We've got to be able to take the time to organize, curate, and give the AI the best possible data in order to give it the best possible outcomes. And so tons and tons of tools have been developed to go through and drive a lot of this infrastructure. This is an eye chart. I promise I'm not going to have a test on this at the end. I don't really want you to take anything away other than the fact that there are literally thousands of applications that claim to be able to go through and solve this problem. And many organizations are adopting 1, 10, 100 of these, okay, in their industry or in their IT organization to go through and help solve these problems. And so that's great. A lot of these have amazing pros and cons to them, amazing strengths and weaknesses, okay, but fundamentally the fact that I have to integrate lots and lots of different tools is a challenge, right? And so the promise of Fabric and what Matt is going to take you through today is how Fabric can ultimately go through and replace a lot of those tools and reduce the complexity of your overall data estate. And so in doing that, like the challenges that we're trying to solve with Fabric is organizations have siloed systems and data, right? So whether it's, how I go through and do the integration and all of those amazing tools, a lot of it comes down to what are the source systems where we store our data? Where are the ERP systems? Where are the CRM systems? Where are the, PLM and manufacturing systems that are putting out data? So all of those things are generating data. In order to be able to use it effectively, we've got to get that in one place. A lot of times the types of data that we're working with can be incredibly diverse. And so how we go through and store those, process and aggregate and roll up and make information for our users can change depending on the data that comes in. Often we have poor quality of data. Sometimes that's, we're not doing a great job of validating when there's data entry into those source systems that we're initially putting things in. Maybe we're not putting in fields that we should to, so we have incomplete data. So again, being able to address those challenges as part of ultimately an integration process is something that every organization has to think about. And again, a lot of these tools to go through and drive the integrations historically have been incredibly complex. And so as we start to look at kind of the modern world, a lot of the cloud-driven technologies, Fabric included, right, we've got access to no and low code tools that let us essentially reduce the barrier to entry and make it easier to get started with this. And then again, across organizations, right, but between organizations and also within organizations, we see incredibly varied levels of data literacy and adoption. And so we'll see some users in an organization that really understand the data that they're looking at. They understand where it came from. Others have no idea what source system it is. They don't really understand what the data means. And so again, we have to be able to go through and develop solutions that can address people at different points and meet them where they are. Right. And so again, this creates an integration challenge, right? And so yes, you leaders understand this is extremely important to our overall success, right? But only 32% are saying that they're realizing tangible value from their current tools. So that means that we have a gap that we have the ability to go through and close, right? We see the potential, we see the opportunity, but we've got to do work to go through and unlock business value. And so again, to talk through how we're going to go through and do that and why Fabric is an awesome solution to go through and get that done, I will turn it over to Matt to introduce you to Fabric and take it from here.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Matt Werman with CoStrategix. Let's talk a little bit more about why choose Microsoft Fabric. Let's progress the slide. Here we go.
Little things.
Yeah. So first, just to level set, what is Microsoft Fabric? So Microsoft Fabric is their latest sort of data engineering, data tools for visualization, data ingestion at the Microsoft level, right? They're incorporating new tools with Fabric or with Copilot. They have a new data space called OneLake to store all your enterprise data, as well as a new tool for security and governance with Microsoft Purview. Let's go a little bit deeper. So one of the nice things about Fabric is we want to be able to enable this for every business user. So it works very well to integrate with your Microsoft 365 data, which is very well ingrained with Power BI, and Fabric's coming in as well. That's going to be able to transform your data to make a nice universe for analysis of your data, visualization, and gathering your data in one place. So one of the reasons we want to choose Fabric is we're going to be able to integrate Microsoft data assets easier without a lot of heavy engineering. This is that low code, no code environment we're talking about. We're also going to be able to integrate with on-premise networks and other clouds by making either symbolic links or easier connections to those networks. In addition, we're going to be sort of moving away from more the traditional build in Azure, where we have to deal with a lot of infrastructure, and getting more into more just a solution and just work in Fabric itself. If you're familiar, if you've been in the Microsoft data space for a while, I've been here for 8 years now. In the beginning, I had all the tools available to me. I had a storage account, but they were all separate. Storage accounts, function apps, data factories, the old SQL data warehouse tool. And I had to clob them all together and get the security and network right to make it happen. And Fabric sort of elevates that from its previous incarnation called Synapse and brings it out of Azure into Microsoft level so we can really empower and use the tools and the learnings they have that's built on top of all the learnings and the foundations in Azure to bring it forward. So first, talking about integrating the assets without a lot of heavy engineering. Fabric is tied into that Microsoft universe. So we have all the tools in Azure that we can tie back to for, say, AI learnings and so forth. Heavily ties into Office 365. I'm going to, by mentioning as well, a lot of Power BI is integrated, is built within Fabric, and Power BI has a lot of great integrations already to these tools with PowerPoint and Outlook and Teams. With Dynamics 365, there's a native connections into those tools as well, and into the Power Platform. If people have Power Apps in the Dataverse, we can bring those into Fabric easily. And then also third-party apps. There are building out the ecosystem, which is what they've been building out for years within the Azure Data Factory to help make connections into Fabric easier for engineers and analysts to perform. So when we start talking about on-prem networks and other clouds, Microsoft does bring together some tools to make, in one way, symbolic links. We can make symbolic links out to data that lives, say, in AWS, whether it's an S3 bucket or an RDS database, or out to Google Cloud, GCP, and other places. In addition, they've introduced mirroring technology, so we can connect to databases and set up a mirroring infrastructure so we can bring over the change data sets for each of those and keep in sort of near real time, keep the data updated in Fabric without having to do a large copy activity. The symbolic links allow us to connect the data without having to do any copying of data. So it brings the data together and available inside one place for all the tools that we need to use. Getting a little bit more in the infrastructure part, talking about OneLake, if you're familiar with OneDrive and how OneDrive works within Office 365 and how you can keep all your data in one place and share and work with in Teams and SharePoint, OneLake is very similar to that. OneLake is going to be our one place where all our data is stored within Fabric for our data platform. It's going to be a nice unified spot where administrators can come in and govern access. It's one place for engineers and data analysts to come in and work and see all their data in one spot to discover and what they want to do. And data can be shared with people throughout the organization without copying data. And this becomes a place where we can have a trusted environment. We see what we have. Everybody's using the same information to start driving the business forward, using the same data, same KPIs. So we don't lose that definition between finance and operations and so forth. So maturing your data, the ecosystem with Fabric. So we're going to talk through a set of 6 phases of maturity. This is a breakdown that I put together if I was getting started, and working towards getting insights fast. We want to get insights now. Now, you may say, I know I want all this. Just let's do everything. Like, let's just go straight and get all the way out to step 5 and just build it all now. And some people say, do that, and they just want to have a big project, go for it, and just get it all done. But in some cases, we want to start early and get the critical data. Find out that first system that is critical to the company. Maybe it's your ERP or it's another system, warehouse management system. Whichever it is, it's going to be the system that's causing the most analytics heartburn. That's either the hardest to get data out, it's the hardest, it's the built-in reports that just don't work exactly the way you want it, that is going to deliver results the quickest for the company to start realizing value out of this build. And as we go forward to connect and build out, we will then keep maturing and growing and continue to deliver insights and values while we build out the entire product. So to start, as I was mentioning, wanting to drive value quick, we want to work with the data that we actually need and not spend all our time getting everything. We can connect to an ERP system and there might be 1,000 tables, but I bet we only need 20 for the data needed to get the reports out to the business they need quickly. We can always come back later and get more, but only if we need it. As I go through the steps, I'm going to be talking a lot through this process and also the people involved. So as we go through step 1, phase 2, phase 3, we're going to be talking about finding and connecting your data, trying to get it all accessible inside Fabric. We're going to work to, as we bring it in, we want to analyze that data and get it available for reports and sharing out easily. And there's always going to be that last piece where we have report developers, Power BI experts who want to get that data and start sharing it with the company. Along with those 3 steps, we have the people. I'm going to talk about the data engineers and how they are impacted through this process, and the data analyst as they receive data, what they're going to do, and then our data citizens, the ones that are going to actually do the analytics and build out those insights to share with the company. And just another comment here as I go through, I'm going to also mention the governance part and security. Microsoft Purview is listed down there at the bottom. It's like OneLake. It's enterprise-wide. When you start using Fabric, you get a OneLake automatically. It's enterprise-wide. Purview is an enterprise-wide tool as well. So as we're bringing people in, data engineers, analysts, data citizens, I'm going to be mentioning the spots where we have to keep going back and reviewing our governance and our security rules to ensure as we grow and add data, that we are ensuring that the right access is in place along the way. So the first piece, we're going to talk about connecting that critical system. And in the example I'm going to mention, we're going to use leveraging data mirroring to bring in real-time increments so we can have the data in our data lake right away, or in a lakehouse right away. Multiple different technologies are supported based on what you may have, whether it's in Azure, on-premise, or in another cloud. And setting this up is relatively simple, straightforward inside Microsoft Fabric, where we should be able to connect, set up the mirroring. The data engineer is going to come in and connect, set up the mirroring into a lakehouse, provide that to the data analyst to start putting in the qualities and checks, and if there's any analytical products that need to come out, views and so forth, and provide that to report users to start building out those first insights to the business users. I say that should take about a week to a business week, 2 to 5 days, depending on the complexity of making that connection through companies' networks, as opposed to 2 to 4 weeks, which in a typical agile world, that might be 1 or 2 sprints to get all the engineering and such in place and moved over. Fabric is going to allow us to reduce that by reducing the amount of engineering required to get it connected, get it in the hands of the analyst and into the report users, just driving out the first insights quickly. As we go through each step 2, I'm going to be building out a architecture diagram that shows how all the pieces are connected. In this case here, I'm talking in the example I have, we have an on-premise internal system, the SQL database that we're going to connect into Fabric and build out our first mirrored lakehouse. Right, so data engineers are going to build that together. Data analysts are going to review that and then start building out semantic models, which the business intelligence or the report users are going to use with their Power BI and hand that out to the general users. So this is the first phase. We should be able to get set up and running in a quick manner with Fabric in about a week and start driving that value of getting insights quickly and reducing any friction that critical system may have with its analytics. The second step, we want to expand our footprint. This is a rather heavy data engineering step because now we're looking for everything. What else is necessary for an organization's data product, right? In this case, we want to make connections into Office 365 and SharePoint for any data sets that are maybe some reference data sets, other sets may be coming from the Dataverse, from any Power Apps, as well as look at other tools you might be using, other SaaS products, or maybe your payroll system, HR system, maybe a warehouse management or e-commerce systems. And hopefully they all have nice REST API interfaces and not an old SOAP web interface or maybe an SFTP interface. Because a lot of those can be supported inside Fabric when they have a nice, well-defined modern API interface. If not, we have the option of stepping back down to Azure using either Data Factory or some function apps to make some of the more harder connections necessary to bring the data in, staging it sort of through Azure and getting it into Fabric. And here, since we are starting to build out more data sets, we want to make sure our governance rules are going to be keep up with the data we're adding. And so we're going to look to add sort of a lake house per schema or per data set here. And my estimate is about 1 to 2 weeks, about a sprint of work to find and connect that data set, get it loaded and defined and in. A lot of systems, when I say have a nice REST API interface, we're not talking about just one connection. There might be like 6. We got to pull out 6 different things and get those set up into one lake house. And it's just a matter of a little bit of a linear scale. How much do you got to do? And how much you got to do linear scale is about 1 to 2 weeks per data set in Fabric, or about 4 weeks outside in building it with straight Azure resources. So our diagram is growing. And in this case, we're adding in Office 365. And in my example, I have an external system that is more difficult to connect. And so I have to use Azure Data Factory to help stage and bring that in. So we're starting to load some business data from different Microsoft Universe resources from OneDrive and so forth, and opening up a operations data lakehouse as well to start driving more operation reports, maybe in a QBR report to bring in and combine with that first critical system. Step 3, it's step 3 here, but it's maybe more like a 2.5. This is more optional. Not every system, not every company, has streaming data assets. But there are companies out there that have IoT type devices in the field, either like in vehicles with sending telematic data in real time, or maybe they have applications that are sending data down in more like a pub sub sort of model for events. So Fabric is able to connect with streaming assets and get that into the system in a very sort of Databricks Delta Lake format to bring the data in and be able to drive event-driven insights on your data if need be. Not everybody has this, but where it's available, Fabric is going to be able to help us out. Streaming does take a little bit more effort to make sure if all the pieces are working. So the efforts per streaming source is about 3 to 4 weeks or 1 to 2 sprints, as opposed to 1 to 2 months, to make sure all of that is up and working properly. And one thing that changes inside Fabric, they do call this an event house as opposed to a lake house. So we have events coming in. As you can see, this is a diagram from Microsoft about different data sources, regardless of what cloud provider they're on, and bring that data in and be able to still get that out and sort of this real-time Fabric hub out to Power BI through an event house. And again, everything is still hosted on one lake. Our diagram is growing. Again, I have down at the bottom some event streams coming in. In this example, we have an external system, like we're going to say, so there was already some streaming systems coming in. So there are event hubs in Azure that are pulling data from an external streaming point and also some IoT devices. And through a Spark connector, we can create an event house to start housing that data and bringing it into, say, the operations semantic model. Step 4, build out a full data model. And what I mean here is now that we have all our data in place, we have everything that the organization thinks they need. So we want to take that, essentially the raw, more technical data formats that the external systems have defined, and we're going to turn this into a star schema and create essentially a schema of what a data set defined for what the organization is. We're going to define dimensions and facts. We're like what's an employee, a customer, or a patient. Figure out what are all the facts that are around the main components of our organization, and to make the analytics and so forth that are going to drive the reports easier for business users to use. I don't want a business user have to understand the schema provided by a vehicle telematic streaming system or an HR system and all their nomenclature. I want them to be able to see and use and read exactly what's going on with employee, and if they need to look at their security or time off request and merge that data in with operations to understand employment staffing needs. We want to make that readable and intelligent in a nice star schema. One of the outputs of this work is a nice detailed data catalog that's going to be useful for all people to be able to come in and discover exactly what is there. In addition to a catalog, so where we can see and discover data, we also get from Fabric a data lineage. So people can come in and see with transparency, where is their data? How did it get here? And what is it comprised of? So we can see through the pipeline from report to source, what do they have available to them? And this builds in it. What's really nice through the catalog and lineage, it builds trust and understanding what it's there, along with putting in the different metadata points and quality and validation steps to really ensure that when that data gets through the medallion architecture of the raw bronze, transformed silver, and that activated gold schema, they can have trust and know that what they have is good and the reports are going to be accurate for the business. Now, this one, the building out the full data model and converting the raw data into dimensions and facts, this is a heavy on the data analyst, not a lot, not as much on the engineers. But there's a lot of work to go through each of those and essentially define out what those dimensions and facts are, get those build and those transformations in place. So this is a little more heavy lifting, 2 to 4 months in Fabric as opposed to 3 to 5, because we don't have to build as much on the documentation, and we can start building the pieces in place to start building that out. So that does depend, 2 to 4 months or 3 to 5 months, really depends on how much data we got to get through. Obviously, if there's more, this is going to get longer, but this is a long pool for the data analysts, right? It's going to be 4 to 8 sprints to get everything done. And so our schemas, our architecture diagram is changing a little bit. A lot of our original lake houses are moving. They're going to move into the bronze raw. We're going to combine those together to say all our bronze data is essentially now living in one lake house. We leave out the event house and the mirrored ERP lake house, as that data will feed into it. And then we're going to start building the transformations to silver, because if you remember, in the bronze, that has everything. That's going to have multiple versions of data, depending on how the data comes in. A single record might be represented many times or within a month. If you use, say, for instance, Microsoft FinOps data, you'll possibly have data on your Azure cost data that may exist every day of the month. And so you got to make sure that you always have the latest and greatest data that's coming out of your bronze. Make sure there's no duplicate records and such. And that is what happens when we move into silver. Silver is a representation of all the data that's available. It's been validated. It's of quality. There's no any cleaning has occurred or data type cleanup and so forth. So we got nice, clean, valid data. And then from there, we are going to transform that into the star schema within the gold lakehouse. Again, a lot of work for the data analysts, and also to update semantic models. The report users are going to have to start. We're going to have to start updating their semantic models and reports to transition from what was now in the bronze lakehouse, using that raw data, and switch over to the semantic or the gold layer that's now needed in the semantic models. 5, enabling self-service. And now, once we have our star schema available, we have everything ready to really start enabling business users to really get their hands in this data, to start making decisions with data at the point of where they are doing business, getting it into their hands. This is less of a technology step and more of a, say, education and security review. So employees are going to start wanting to access this gold data and those semantic models. They want to start building their own reports. And how are they going to do that? Well, one, we need to make sure they know how. We need to get demonstrations and level set this community of users, give them how-to guides if necessary. How do we request access? How do we request access to secure data or PII if that exists in? Where is the data catalog? Best practices for using the data set? How is it best to link and understand how the different elements are working together? And also for building reports, building out some best practices for reports and providing templates. You could provide Power BI templates so everybody is using the same color schemes and icons and so forth. So there's a lot here to more communicate and educate and get this in their hands so they can start working with it. And again, this is a good spot for security review to make sure that, are we going to go full force into Microsoft Purview for governance and workflows to keep track of the policies and so forth? Or maybe we're going to do something a little simpler and work simply in Azure Intra, create security groups tied to lake houses and semantic models and work through a security group layer, which is also possible. So there's multiple ways to knock this down. And Mike's going to talk more about security later on in the webinar. So in this case, there's not a lot of changes to our diagram, but you'll see out on the right, we're now providing access by our employees to access to that gold layer and also semantic models, not just to the reports provided to them. We want to give them access to reports to start building things they need. There's still a need for a main set of business intelligence analysts, report writers who may build out, say, the core report or some of the core dashboards the business use. But that, maybe that line manager in a production facility, in a factory, they need something specific to them, or the HR manager, they need something that's directly off of the HR system, and they can come in, build something they need. And if it becomes something important, a nice way is that they find it important, and then they can elevate that back to the IT team or whoever is running the report creators to help promote that up. Good working reports found within teams should be promoted up and made available to the organization as they might find it useful as well. So essentially, your data cloud is realized. You have something, whether you want like self-service or not, and some of the challenges that can come with, you have all your data. It's in a nice star schema. It's ready to go, but we're not quite done. That last step is, I try to emphasize, we want to treat this as a product. This is an internal product to the company, to the organization, and we want to keep it evolving. I like to think of it as data analytics flywheel, that we want to keep looking at what data we have out there, not just the data we're bringing in. So if there's a new system attached, yes, we want to see if we can get that in. Maybe there's other data sets, the system's connected, that we could bring in later. And then there might be new reports, new KPIs we want to build. But the idea is we want to manage this as a product to strategize where it could go, where it can go next, build solution, design those solutions, deliver those out to the organization and continue to operate those, and then elevate again. The purpose of this is that your data analytics solution and the KPIs and the reports you're using today to run the business and drive the business are good today. Tomorrow, the world might change, the politics might change, the climate may change, the business might change. There might be a disruptive competitor coming into the mix, and that means your analytics are probably going to change. How you view and run your business may change, and so we want to keep that available to always be able to feed back in and say, I need this KPI now. The KPIs I had last quarter, I solved those problems. We are now operating at a higher level of efficiency. I need new KPIs to drive newer efficiencies or different efficiencies in the system to help our bottom line. So what's next? Things that can be added in specifically for data science workspaces. We can start adding in large language models and generative AI, data ops to keep watch if we have some very either sensitive or data that might come in that's prone to errors, and really trying to watch and make sure that that is working well. We can do compliance and security labeling to help drive, if you are a HIPAA-based organization or you have credit card data coming through, we want to make sure this we can have steps and processes and new projects to do compliance and security. Master data management is big for a lot of companies to get that one view of, say, a customer, a patient, or an employee to help drive what's happening within the organization across how those entities are defined across multiple systems. And then also into either observability and data reliability as well to kind of keep track to make sure and reinforce the trust in the system and the data product that's available. So speaking of what's next with AI, with Microsoft Fabric, Azure has made it easy to bring in the Azure AI portfolio. There's data science tools built into Fabric. It's easy to connect back out into Azure machine learning workspaces. In this diagram, it's Azure AI Studio. They have renamed that. It's now called Azure AI Foundry. So we can connect Fabric into there. And also Azure AI Search. And this is all possible to make these easier to access these AI tools provided by Microsoft as all our data is in one lake. Right. So once our data is in one lake and we've done a good job of organizing it, establishing good metadata tags throughout our data, we can get this connected with our AI tools easier to start developing new insights and maybe new data sets to learn what's next for our company. What do we want to analyze to ensure we have an advantage or provide better service to our customers?
You know, in today's modern world, if you're not growing, changing, evolving, getting better, you're probably following behind your competitors. And so I think, Matt, what I loved about your presentation on that one is that it really shows the value of having a set of tools that are integrated, right? So it makes it easier to drive it in integration. I don't have to get into multiple tool sets, right? It means that our speed to value, our time to value is lower, it's faster, right? Which again is incredibly important in today's modern business world. The other big advantage of having everything in a single integrated platform is that it simplifies data security and governance. And that's what I'm going to go through and spend a few minutes talking about. Now, what's interesting here to me is that data security and governance is simple, but it is not easy. Okay, and the reason it's not easy is that's not the way our users think. Okay, we might think about if we're in IT, we may think about how we have to secure data, how to govern it, right? But in the end, our business users just want to get things done. Okay, and so building out a data governance, data security policy across an organization requires discipline. Okay, which means that I've got to go through and step into this in a way and essentially build an organizational muscle for how we go through and do that. And so when we think about data security kind of across the board here, right, we're thinking about what's in our data assets like inside of Fabric and our other systems. We're thinking about our unstructured data that's in Microsoft 365, potentially in file servers and things like that. And we see a lot of things, a lot of commonality to how customers approach this and get better at this over time. Right. And so a couple things that I want you to take away from the model that we've built here as part of this is that on the left side and right side, change management and policies defined, these apply at every single aspect of how you go through and evolve in your data security and data governance journey. Everything that we're going to do from a technology standpoint comes back to making sure that we enable our users, that they understand what's required of them, how they interact with whatever tools we put in place. And then again, the technology is fundamentally the easy part. Defining the policies around who can do what, right? How often we're going to follow up on things, all of the stuff that goes into creating and aligning the technology ultimately comes back to a written policy. So we really see organizations kind of start with some of the basics. And so a lot of times this is looking at our data lifecycle management, how we can enforce minimum retention periods across our content. You're doing things like integrating and putting conditional access in so that we're only allowing connections to compliant and managed devices. So that could be using tools like Entra ID conditional access and Intune, which again integrates directly with Fabric and Azure to go through and make sure that we're extending our security perimeter to those systems as well. Often, if we're delivering data on a mobile device, we want to make sure that we're using mobile application management. So let's say we have the Power BI app on an end user's phone. They're consuming reports on a phone or a tablet. We want to make sure that that data is containerized. And so if that person leaves the organization with that device, we can wipe the organization's data without ultimately impacting the rest of their information. And again, we can do that with some of the tools that are part of M365. Starting to look at things like where I have sensitive data that's leaving my security perimeter, so data loss prevention, and then maybe even taking the time to go through and put manual labels on sensitive data to go through and lock down certain types of data to specific users in an organization. Right, as we start to evolve and get better with the usage, we see organizations start to look at automating sensitivity labels at scale. Right, and so typically this starts with our unstructured data. We're usually doing this with data on Microsoft 365. We're doing it with data on file servers. We're doing it with data on our end users' PCs. We start to go through and put structure around how we monitor usage of Purview to go through. And again, especially as people, as we go through and grant access to tools like Purview, people can view potentially sensitive data, right? We want to make sure that we understand when, where, and how people are using those enhanced security roles. Starting to implement endpoint and browser data loss prevention, monitoring for other cloud application usage, right? If we build this amazing structure inside of Fabric, I don't want somebody going out and buying a third-party solution that IT doesn't have access to and connecting it up. So being able to have visibility into it and to control for that is incredibly important. Right, as we move forward then, starting to look at how we then to integrate in a more complex level. And so this means actually getting to the point where we sanction or unsanction other software as a service apps. That would mean potentially blocking access to unapproved analytics tools that aren't part of our security ecosystem. And then looking at things like where we're actually sharing data. So applying sensitivity labels to Power BI workspaces. So again, if we're generating content from sensitive data, imagine a report that should be limited to the board of directors of your organization, right? We have the ability to go through and do that, which means that even if someone, ultimately doesn't have, takes the report and tries to go through and download a copy and share it with somebody else inappropriately, sensitivity labels are persistent. That protection follows the data regardless of where it lives. So integrating that into things like Power BI, okay, is definitely part of that evolution as you move forward. But really, ultimately, we want to try to do is to get to a very proactive approach to how we control access and govern our data. So that means that we want to do things like leverage access packages that let us go through and bundle up access to applications, access to groups, teams, SharePoint sites, essentially all of the things that we use to control access to our data, bundle those up and apply them in a structured way based on the user's role within the organization. Tools like insider risk management that are part of Microsoft 365 E5 can help us identify where users might be misusing data. They might be downloading data in bulk that they shouldn't. They may be sharing data externally in a way that's not usable. And again, the value of these M365 and Fabric and Azure tools is that we can easily share data with people both inside and outside of the organization. That's awesome from a business standpoint, but we want to keep an eye on that to make sure that that's not being misused. Starting to curate our data, starting to delete or archive legacy data so that it's not included in our models, it's not reasoned over by AI tools is definitely where we see this phase. And then ultimately connecting up Purview to our structured data assets. Where do we have our databases, in Fabric or otherwise? Can we connect up Purview to both catalog and then identify where we have sensitive data and apply labels to those data assets as well? And again, this is over time. This is a journey that's typically a couple of years. This is not an overnight thing, right? And it allows organizations to step into this in a way that users can adjust to, IT can adjust to, and ultimately drive success for the organization. So as I said, a lot of this isn't a technology problem. It's a discipline problem. And so a lot of this comes back to, before we even build policies, we've got to figure out what data are we working with. So if we've gone through the process of building our data lakehouse on Fabric, right, if we've taken the time to go through and drive the integration, we'll have a lot of that data, right? But again, we think of this holistically. This is not just our structured data assets, it's everything. So we want to understand, where's the data that is important to the organization, what are those content types, what are the locations where it's stored, who owns it, and who's allowed to access it, right? And I think it's also important at this point to recognize that the data security conversation, controlling access, is linked to knowledge management, right? We want to be able to get information in front of the right people, and we want to make sure that it is current information. So the same concept that we're having around how do we monitor and control access on an ongoing basis is, how do we make sure that that data stays up to date and that the right people have access to it on an ongoing basis. They're really two sides of the same coin, but there's a lot of similarities and overlap between those conversations. Right, the next thing, okay, is to go through and implement the policies. We've got to create the policies before we go implement the technology. And the reason we do that is that we need to get the business on board, because this is something that IT can help drive, but we're really going to rely on our business users and content owners to work with us on these goals of data protection. And so what the policies do is they help us define the roles and responsibilities of the people that are engaged in this, whether it's an end user who is a consumer of a data asset in some way, shape, or form, or a person who is responsible for maintaining and updating it on a regular basis. It also feeds into who is allowed to access and what our security and classification permissions are that go with that. And as I mentioned before, adoption and change management is huge, right? The biggest fear when we start talking to the business about data governance is this going to disrupt my business, and how much time is it going to take, right? So getting stakeholders engaged early, helping them understand the challenge, helping them understand the business benefit of data governance and security, okay, is incredibly important to having success in this space. As I mentioned, we don't see people trying to roll this stuff out overnight and going from 100 to 400 immediately. It takes time to go through and roll these out, right? And so we limit risk by gradually rolling things out. And this is something that we work with CoStrategix and with our customers on, because this is really at the heart of a lot of what we do. Like, we ended up hiring the leader of our employee experience practice, who has a PhD in organizational development. And so we really want to make sure that when we work with you here, whether it's purview, data governance, or anything else, right, that we're understanding the user impact, and that ultimately we're doing the change management to make sure that you are getting the actual value out of the technology investment that you made. And then lastly, you need to have a strategy for ongoing management. And so, like I said, some of this stuff is going to be things that we expect our business users to integrate and be part of conversations, right? But a lot of things are stuff that IT is going to have to go through and get done. We need regular oversight of a lot of the learning that comes from these tools as part of it. There may be configuration changes that need to be done. It's possible to go through and do, like, execute content search, e-discovery requests. So again, there's a lot of tasks that IT needs to do that may not be something that's part of the wheelhouse. So again, having a strategy to go through and do that, whether it's working with a partner like Interlink or CoStrategix to help with that, or handling it in-house, but making sure that you have that strategy for ongoing management is super important. All right, so if we've got you even a little bit interested based on everything that we've talked about so far, we've got a couple things to go through and offer, right? So a couple things that we can do here in conjunction with CoStrategix, right, where they would essentially take the lead on this for you. There's a couple of things to make it easy for you to get started. The first would be a Fabric starter assessment. The goal here is to take a pretty quick review at your data footprint, understand the systems that you have in place that are your key data assets, right? Create a high-level architecture and a security model that fits your needs. Okay, something very easy to do for about 5,000, depending on the number of systems that we're connecting you. Something that might be a little bit more practical, that's not just theory, would be a Fabric Jumpstart. So we're doing some of the same stuff there from the Fabric Starter assessment, with the exception of we're actually going to stand up Fabric and connect one of your assets to it. And again, this is going to vary a little bit based on the complexity of the data source, but typically these are in the 10 to 12K range. And the wonderful thing about both of these is that, as always with Microsoft, when we're talking about deploying new workloads in their cloud systems, there's usually some level of Microsoft funding available. So we would love to work with you, work with CoStrategix. Three of us would get together, figure out what options are on the table, but in many, many cases, we can go through and get these funded for customers that want to take that next step. So questions and answers. And I'm going to skip forward to one of these, okay, because I think this is the question that everybody's got to be asking. Well, Fabric's amazing. How much does it actually cost? So I'll take this one, Matt. Fundamentally, with Fabric, we're going to go through and ultimately be charged for a couple of things. So the first is the compute pricing that we allocate to Fabric overall. Okay, so this is going to be based on the capacity units, which really kind of almost come back or analogize to virtual cores that are being allocated to the underlying Fabric compute instance that drives all of the services that Matt talked about today. So these scale up pretty high. So the cheapest that we can start with, $260 a month. If we buy this under an Azure reservation, which means we're making a 12-month commitment, which again can be canceled, right, with a little bit of a restock fee. So you're not actually 100% committed to that. A lot of savings involved to go through and do that. These scale up to 200K a month for enterprise data warehouse workloads, right? But the one that I stopped at from a pricing standpoint is F64. And this one's important because Fabric 64 gives us the same benefits as the old Power BI premium capacity. And so this is a scenario where we're talking about rolling out reports at scale across the organization. One way to do that is to license all of my users for Power BI Pro, either standalone or through Microsoft 365 E5 licensing. Alternatively, I could license my report writers to publish using the Power BI Pro license, but anything in Power BI that is tied back to a Fabric capacity of F64 or more, I can publish to as many users as I want without having to have a licensed user for it. So a huge advantage once we get past the F64 to be able to go through and roll out reporting to our people at scale. Beyond the compute, the second thing that we're going to go through and get charged for from Microsoft's standpoint is going to be the amount of data storage that ultimately ends up in OneLake as well, right? And so essentially based on the type of data that we're working with, the cost is going to vary a little bit based on those types of storage. One thing that is an exception that is really nice is when we're doing data mirroring, okay, into Azure. Based on the capacity units that we have allocated, I have up to the same amount of terabytes of mirror data that I can bring into Fabric for free at no additional charge, which is awesome. So again, happy to take your questions as you have them here. Actually, I got one more slide here that I want to go back to hit. So a couple other things here just about the pricing. Again, yeah, as I mentioned before, the pricing is very similar to the Power BI premium capacity from a sizing standpoint. And the beautiful part here is that all of the things that we talked about here, so doing previously, maybe I had to go through and I'd have multiple standalone SQL databases, and I'd have a Synapse data warehouse, and I'd have a data lake over here, and I'd have some Power BI reporting and Azure Data Factory, and maybe some data and blob storage in Microsoft 365. With Fabric, I don't have to worry about paying for each of those individually. Fabric Capacity provides all of that functionality under the one price for compute, one price for storage, and that's it, which gives you the ability to grow through Smart Small and ultimately grow with your organization. So Matt, if a customer is already using Azure services, how would you transition to Fabric and what would that look like?
So yeah, so if you have some customers already have existing clouds and want to start taking advantage of Fabric, right? So we can look at what is a current data factory and how maybe moving that into Fabric might save money on what the data factory is doing today. Data factory can be kind of high in cost depending on how much compute is being used for different pipelines. And that could be brought into Fabric to help reduce some cost. And we also keeping our data lakes and moving those into lake houses. We can keep data that's in our storage accounts today and connect those into lake houses. So it's a easy lift to do that because it's the same underlying technology of a storage account Gen 2 using that blob storage to link to lake houses, new and old. And as well, if anybody out there has one of the costly dedicated SQL pools, Microsoft does offer a run book to follow to migrate that into place. On the other side, those without a data cloud, there's a number of applications. Connecting Azure services is easy to do. There's a lot of native connections directly into Fabric for this. Data mirroring is easier with Azure services. And developers are going to be familiar with working in Fabric. A lot of the interfaces from a lot of the different tool sets within Power BI, Excel, and Azure services and Data Factory, Purview, they all have the same user experience, user interface. It all looks very familiar. They're going to be if they've worked in other low code, no code environments inside Microsoft, the learning curve is going to be small.
Yeah, I think that's honestly something that for me is probably an underrated benefit that I don't think we emphasized enough. I mean, even if you go through and you need an organization like CoStrategix to come in and do some of the heavy lifting, and that's a great thing to go through and do, especially with how do I get there from here in a quick and efficient way. They can go through and help you do that. There's also a question of how do you go through and maintain this over time. The fact that there is such an amazing ecosystem of people, okay, that have been built up around the Microsoft platform, okay, means that when you're looking at, again, maybe you still bring in co-strategics for big new initiatives and things like that, right? But for some of the day-to-day interaction with these tooling, the likelihood that people are going to be familiar with the tools shoots up exponentially if we stay within the Microsoft ecosystem. So another question here that we have for you, Matt. How does Fabric help with AI?
One of the key pieces is that Fabric is foundation that's in OneLake is a data lake. It's a lake house. The data is where AI likes to use it. So data scientists love data lakes because not just having the data at hand, it has historical data, right? It can go back and essentially time travel and look at that data. So that is available and they really like it. Fabric is also helping us with adding metadata to those elements. So like adding additional tags and pieces of how and where and why that data was created. LLM models love seeing this extra metadata so they can get a better understanding. It also brings it into one place so we can have the AI access all our data in one spot, as opposed to I got data in this storage account, I got it in this database, or I have it over here in Redshift, or I have some over in Snowflake or in GCP. We can have it linked together in a way that without having to do a lot of extra copy work, or it's in Azure, we can bring it all together under OneLake and be able to have it co-located or virtualized so the AI systems are going to be able to have what they need. And the AI engineer, the data scientists are going to be able to move quickly with what they have
Yeah, and
instead of doing the data engineering to actually get their access to that data, right?
Yeah, totally agree. And I think one of the things I would emphasize here about Microsoft and Azure as a platform in particular is that, Microsoft it's interesting to me that the operating system for a virtual machine run on Azure, the most common one is not Windows Server, it's actually Linux. Microsoft has embraced Azure as an open platform, and so even though you're going to have access to the open AI models that Microsoft has invested in from a ChatGPT standpoint, you're also able to go through and run other third-party AI models on there as well. So they've had partnerships with Meta and their Llama model. But there's quite a few models that are available as part of this. Same thing from a machine learning standpoint. We've got access to, built-in machine learning and Python-based models that Microsoft has already created. You can also create your own custom models in Python or R. So you've got a lot of capabilities there, and it's not limited to Microsoft-specific tools, right? And again, when we talk about Fabric, it's easy to go through and bring in data from other places. Microsoft isn't pushing you consolidate all your data, right, and actually migrate it out of whatever source system it's in. It's we want to go through and centralize access to it. Sometimes it's copying a copy of it in like a mirror. Sometimes it's just setting up a symbolic link, right? But in the end, we give the data close to where the tools live so that a barrier to adoption of new AI tools goes down, which is pretty awesome. So again, we're closing up on our time here and appreciate everyone's time and attention. I'll give one last call for questions. Please feel free to go through and put those in the chat if you have them. But awesome there, Matt. Thank you for that one. Is it difficult to connect Fabric with Microsoft Dynamics cloud products? Matt?
It's not supposed to be. I would say it's going to come down to security models and such that are in Dynamics, but there are supposed to be nice native connectors in between, right? So which Dynamics product do you have? It should fit nicely because they also had previously under Azure Data Factory and so forth native connectors as well. So we should be able to connect Dynamics and be able to get it connected or data there and available in Fabric in a straightforward manner.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, and maybe just to kind of summarize that one, is the answer is yes, it should be easy with the caveat that certain customizations or security changes may make it a tiny bit harder, right? But still pretty feasible
That's right.
overall. Again, one last call for questions before we wrap. Going once, going twice. Okay, so if you do end up with additional questions, you didn't think about it today, the easy button to get a hold of us is hello@interlink.com. If you have a question for me, they'll route it to me. If you have a question for Matt and CoStrategix, we'll route it to them. Bottom line is, if you have a question or you want to take a next step, we will make it easy for you to get connected to the right resource that you needed. But thank you so much for your time and attention. Matt, thank you again for joining us. It
Thank
was
you,
an
Mike.
awesome job. And I hope everyone has an amazing day. Thank you so much.